Welcome to another edition of Inside Carolina's Next Level. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Greg Barnes. Sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. CongruityHR.com/Tar Heels for your small to mid-sized business needs. Greg, we've interviewed some coaches. We've interviewed former players. We've interviewed governors, attorney generals, uh, the whole gamut. And I'm not sure that what we're going to talk about today. I'm not sure that this is not the most important thing for Carolina athletics going into the future. Carolina NIL launches today, August 1st. Greg, your overall thoughts on where we are today, August 1st, for Carolina athletics?
It's been a long time coming, Tommy, and I think North Carolina athletics are finally in a spot where they're comfortable. There's still more work to be done, and everybody involved will tell you the same thing. Um, but really, for the first time, I think Carolina is in a fantastic position with having everything under the same umbrella. This is something that has been talked about for a good while now. We sat down with former Chancellor Kevin Guskowitz in December, and even then he was talking about the need to kind of bring everything in house and to have it under one umbrella. And then, of course, in April, the NCAA decided that they were finally going to allow universities to play a role in NIL in terms of helping set up some deals and provide some guidance to student athletes, which I think was a smart thing. And then UNC from there really kind of sped this up and wanted to make sure that it was ready to go for this upcoming academic year, and that's what we see. And so there's been a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of people involved in this, but everybody that we've talked to feels really good about the current setup with Carolina NIL and how things project moving forward.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is "Do not mistake patience for inaction." North Carolina has certainly been working. Greg, NIL I think came into effect officially on July of 2021, if my math is correct, 3 years ago, and we're a little beyond that. I guess questions I hear from other people, and you mentioned all the moving parts and what's been going on until today, is what took so long to get it figured out. I think giving all the moving parts and giving all the nuts and bolts and the legislature and all that kind of stuff coming into it is a big reason for that. But your take on here we are 3 years and a month or so after the debut of NIL, legal NIL. Uh, how did we get here today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a valid one. And I think what I would say is that there are consequences and repercussions to the NCAA's inability to govern properly. That's probably the nicest way that I can say that. If you go back to July 1st, 2021, the NCAA, because they were forced to, because there had been state legislatures who had decided that, hey, you know what? It is time for student athletes to receive a little bit of the pot, and the NCAA was not in favor for it. And at the last minute, because July 1st, 2021 is when some of these rules went into place in these various states, they said, you know what, we're going to do it, figure it out. The NCAA on that date provided us with three uh, guidances. Three. That was it. And what those were it cannot be pay for play. You cannot have improper inducements tied to choosing to attend a specific school, and compensation cannot be for athletic participation. That was it. And so you had various schools around the country kind of saying, like, what are we supposed to be doing with this? And give credit to UNC because even dating back then, they had a pretty good idea that this was coming, and they started putting together. I mean, the licensing deals. That was a Bubba creation, right? Of trying to get these group deals where it's not just one player, but it's entire teams or entire particular position groups, offensive line or whatever it may be. That was unique at the time. Nobody was doing that, but still, because there was no guidance from the NCAA, you were kind of just throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing if it was going to stick. And so, as we have progressed, the NCAA, it seems like every 6 months or so, they've added a little bit more structure. Well, you can do this. Okay, you can't do that, but you can do this. And so finally, we get to a point in April of 2024, so nearly 3 years after that start date. Now, all of a sudden, the university can get involved. And to kind of give you an idea of what that means, prior to April, if we wanted to go through, we'll say Hills for Life, and talk with the student athlete. Well, because Hills for Life technically is not tied to the university, we couldn't go through the normal university channels and put in a request. We had to go directly to Hills for Life to make that type of request. Well, now that changes. Now the university can be involved, so everything is more streamlined. It makes it a little bit easier. And so when people express frustration about maybe how things have been set up and why things have not been as successful as they would have liked, not just at Carolina, but various places. I mean, there have been a number of NIL collectives that have closed down because it's just kind of a challenging thing to figure out. Just understand that a lot of this is because of poor setup by the NCAA from the get-go. And we are finally now getting to a point where everybody has it figured out. And as I said, there's still more work to be done and kind of getting this set up the way it needs to be done. There'll be more progress with that. But UNC, I think, this is coming from me, I think really for the first time, they feel like they have a pretty good handle on things collectively as a group, as a university. And this allows them to really move forward in a unified mission.
And folks, that's Greg Barnes saying that, who's been probably the preeminent insider discussing all of Carolina's issues, for lack of a better term, over the last 20 years, 20 plus years. So I believe if Greg thinks it's a good thing, then it's a good thing. But early in this show, and we're a few minutes in, let me go ahead and get a couple things out of the way, Greg. We talked about it in preparation for this. I've already heard it that this is going to be men's basketball paying for every other sport, or football paying for every other sport, or rowing NIL, or all this other stuff. Let's sort of clarify the mission, and not only the mission, but the ability and how fans can get involved. Because I think this is important for people that have some misinformation about a collective and what that exactly means. But you can also have targeted donations. I think that's key here.
For sure. And just to get that out of the way first, if you want to just donate to basketball, you can just donate to basketball. There's no issue with that. That does not change. Any particular sport that you want to donate to, you can. If you want to do a blanket donation, that is possible. None of those things are an issue. The key part of this that everybody needs to understand is that because we've covered this a lot over the last year and a half, Tommy, but because North Carolina doesn't have the massive revenue that maybe the SEC or the Big Ten schools do currently, you've got to be very selective in how you go about doing things throughout the athletic program. And that's facilities. That's do you want to upgrade Keenan? Do you want to consider renovating the Dean Dome? Okay, well that takes donor money. Do you want to now have to fill out NIL bankrolls because you want to make sure that such and such player comes back for his senior year, or you want to get a guy out of the portal? Okay, that comes from donor money. Scholarships, all these different things come from donors. And because of the revenue gaps, North Carolina can't just say, you know what, we're putting all of our media revenue towards facilities, towards all those kind of things. So all we have to do is ask donors for NIL stuff. That's what a lot of the SEC schools do. Carolina is not in that position. And so what North Carolina has had to do is they have had to keep going back and back to the same donors for the most part, time and time again, to ask for, hey, we need this for facilities. Hey, we need this for NIL. And the problem is it wasn't just one NIL. It was multiple. And so maybe you have somebody from the basketball side of things going to donors. And then you have somebody from the football side of things going back to the same donor. And so it creates fatigue. And they wanted to make sure that they were not doing that. That's not how you treat your best donors and your supporters, right? And so by getting everything under one umbrella, you can streamline that process and have better rapport with everybody involved. And then because of the NCAA rule change in April where that universities can become more involved. Well, now it becomes a bigger part of things and it's really streamlined with the university. And so, like with the Rams Club being involved, now money going towards NIL, well, you can get points on that. And maybe you can shed a little bit more light on how the points work with donations, Tommy. But I thought that was a pretty significant thing that was announced this morning.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal with the Rams Club thing because one thing I've heard a lot about, from fans and boosters is, I want to donate to the Rams Club, but before today, I also want to donate to the NIL fund because I want to get these players with some money in their pockets, and it was separate. So you saw a lot of people discussing dropping donations on the Rams Club level to pay into the NIL thing. Now, to your point, it's all in house. There's some mechanism to get Rams Club priority points for these donations as well. So I agree with you. It is the best way to get it all under one umbrella. Greg, a key point that you did make, though, still, and I've said it multiple times, is Carolina's still in the hole with the conference alignment and the conference money and all because a lot of these schools, and to your point you just made, Alabama's got brand new buildings all over campus. That's football money, and then you've got booster money going to pay players and all. So I'll ask you this question, and I didn't say I was going to ask this before, but you're good off the cuff. Is how does this get Carolina more in line and more the ability to compete on that level, even without that extra ACC payout money or SEC or Big Ten payout money? How does this help Carolina in that regard? I understand the collective simplifying it, unifying it, and all that, but as far as a national scale, where does this put Carolina in your opinion?
Well, I think the kind of the key thing here is that um, when you streamline everything and you're able to get the university involved, as we have seen, that's going to be a little bit more cost efficient. So that's going to save you some money there. Then with the house settlement coming in, that's going to be a responsibility of the university and largely the Rams Club as well with handling those payments. But you're talking 20 to 30 million dollars is probably what the total bill yearly is going to be with the house settlement. We're still trying to get all the details of that because um, I don't think everybody knows exactly how that's going to play out. There's so many moving parts with all of this. Um, but what North Carolina has to do is they have to continue to find ways to be efficient, which is what this is, and then try to increase revenue. And so one of the things you're going to see is that this is really going to be split into you got for profit and you've got nonprofit. Everybody knows about the nonprofit, but because you have this setup now, you're going to be able to host events. You're going to be able to do a lot of unique things that's going to generate money. And yes, a lot of that's going to be used for NIL and those types of things, but you're going to be able to use some of these funds for everything, whether it be paying part of that house settlement, whether it be covering gaps there with the revenue in terms of media deals. So it's really kind of a platform to launch some revenue gains. And I think people need to understand that. That's why I say it's a great starting point. So I think this is going to look different in terms of how it plays out in the years to come. But in terms of the core setup, I think that's here to stay. I think it's a very good setup, and they'll be able to do a lot of unique things to increase revenue and to really make North Carolina competitive in the NIL market because that has been a challenge at times. I do think it's important to say that with some of the legislation change in recent years, it's not the wild west on the NIL front that it used to be. And so you're able to do more contracts. You're able to put buyouts into those contracts. And so it's not as chaotic as maybe it once was. There's always going to be some changes. John Calipari going to Arkansas. Well, guess what? Everything gets settled down. Then he goes to Arkansas and puts a lot more money into play. And so it shakes up everything. You just have to kind of adjust when those types of things happen. But I think for the most part, everything's kind of settling down. It's not as wild and crazy. We're not hearing the stories that we did a couple years ago. So everything seems to be moving in the right direction, and Carolina's positioned well to capitalize on that.
Talking with Greg Barnes here on Inside Carolina's Next Level, of course, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com, and Congruity. Um, Greg, sort of explain the process a little bit of how this works. We've talked about brokering deals and contracts with players and all of that. Sort of, sort of fill our listeners in on how what you've learned about how this will keep it from being the wild, wild west, where we hear just insane amounts of money and amounts thrown around. And do they actually get the money? What do they have to do to get the money? How can a university balk on it? We obviously heard about the lawsuit that a player had with a SEC school offering him a bunch of money, didn't pay it, and things like that. Sort of, how does this clear that up specifically for schools like North Carolina?
Okay, let's break it down like this from an overhead perspective first. So, what Carolina NIL is, it's a grouping of Carolina Athletics, the Rams Club, the North Carolina Hall of Fame, and Old Well Management. And what Old Well Management is the NIL collective that has combined. So that's Hills for Life, and that's Secondary Break. So Hills for Life, of course, is football. Secondary Break was basketball. And then within that, you're also going to have all the non-revenue sports kind of rolled in, which is pretty much the same way it had been prior to this announcement. So Old Well Management is the NIL arm of this whole deal. And so, yeah, you're right, Tom. If you remember back 2 years ago, but we were hearing stories about kids agreeing to NIL deals and then showing up on campus and they just weren't getting paid. And there was like it was termed to us as free agency without contracts, which is a problem. And then you have agents kind of on the outside saying, "Oh yeah, my player's getting $3 million," and behind the scenes, people are like, "That's not true." Like they're just trying to kind of boost up their players' reputation. And so it was just kind of nuts. You didn't know exactly what to believe. But because some of the legislation changes, as I mentioned, you can do contracts, and you can actually do contracts with people that are in the portal, and you can get signatures that way. Now you can't guarantee funds until the student athlete actually enrolls. So that's a big key for people to understand. They have to actually enroll for any of this to take place. That's where the university tie comes in. But in terms of how the process works, it's very much streamlined now to where if Hubert Davis has uh, a kid that he likes in the portal, and they've decided that hey, we've done our evaluations, and we want to begin negotiations with this kid. Then all they have to do as a coaching staff is go to Old Well Management and say, all right, this is a player we want. This is a player we want to talk to. What can we do? And from there, Old Well Management actually steps in and goes through the negotiating process with the player in question. And so it's really not a situation where the coaching staff is involved heavily with the negotiations of the contracts, which it shouldn't be that way. The NFL level, it's not the head coach negotiating contracts. That's general manager. And so that's probably how people need to think about this is that the coaches kind of say, hey, we like this kid. We want him on campus. They're priority number one or priority number two. And then from there, Old Well Management can start the negotiation process and kind of work through things and see what they can hammer out. So it's a much better process than what it was just 2 years ago. And I think one of the interesting things is that you can do a buyout clause. And so if a kid comes and decides that he can get more money elsewhere, that's fine. But he's going to pay back some of the money that he's getting. And sometimes I guess you could work out a buyout however you wanted to. And then the other interesting thing is when you've got kids already on the roster that you like. It would be a hassle if you have to say, okay, every single year we're going to have to renew these guys. Well, you can do 2-year deals if you want. I assume you can do 3-year deals. And so that there are a lot of unique ways that you can negotiate with players now. And it just makes things a lot easier. So you don't have as much stress involved. Everything is kind of clear. It's not as muddled as it once was. And that should help everything.
when you look at it, you mentioned Hills for Life, secondary break, sort of introduce maybe, I don't know if that's the word for it, but folks listening to this podcast maybe not understanding who's doing this, who's working on this, who's in charge for this, if you could, for North Carolina fans on Inside Carolina.
Well, Kevin Rice is the man behind the scenes. He started working for North Carolina Hall of Fame, I believe, a year and a half ago, a little bit longer than that. So he's really had his hands in this, and he's played a big role in kind of getting everything set up. So that's a big part of it. And then Heals for Life and secondary break really just kind of merged into the Carolina NIL, the Old Well management. That's been very helpful. And TJ, who was with secondary break, he's going to be with Old Well management. He's got a lot of good connections, so that's somebody that people didn't want to lose. And so TJ is going to be around, and that's very beneficial for UNC and the NIL marketplace. And I think last I heard, they're probably going to have 4 full-time employees that work with Old Well management, which is going to be a good thing. So they're going to. I mean, that's not nothing, right? I mean, that's a solid crew there. If you're talking about several full-time employees, if you go back, always go back. It's imprinted in my mind, Tommy. But back to 2010, Carolina only had a handful of people working in compliance at the time when the NCAA came knocking. And compliance is a good bit bigger than that now. And all these branches off of the athletic department, which require compliance, are now going to be solidly staffed, and they're going to have some good people who know exactly what they're doing to make sure everything is done on the up and up, and to make sure that the athletic programs are competitive in this new marketplace that we're all trying to get our hands around.
Greg, a couple more questions for you. We're talking Carolina NIL, the launch on August 1st. I mean, it's no coincidence, or is it a coincidence, that the NCAA just upped the scholarship amounts for across the board? I mean, folks think sports are cheap. It costs a lot of money to pay scholarships, and now we have a lot more that NCAA has approved. How does this help Carolina deal with that?
Well, it is going to be an avenue to bring in more funds, because that's the thing, is that you look at football, 105 scholarships. Was 85. And so that's a lot. I mean, we're talking about 20 scholarships. And even at, I mean, you've got a kid in, you got a couple kids at Carolina now, Tommy. So you know exactly what the in-state tuition is, right?
I definitely know. I know out of state, because I know some people that pay out of state, and it is safe to say it's a lot. It's a lot of money if you add 20 scholarships. And they're doing that across the board, right? Baseball's gone up. All the other sports have gone up.
And so here's the thing. Carolina, as an athletic program nationally, takes immense pride in being one of the most competitive athletic programs everywhere. And it will continue to be that way. But what that means is, if there's 105 scholarships that need to be filled financially, well, Carolina is going to do what it can to do that. You don't want to be the program that say, hey, they can't even fill out their entire roster allotment with scholarship funds. Same with basketball. Now it's up to 15? And people say, well, you only need like 12 guys. That is 100% true. But it's also a matter of, you've got 15 scholarships that you need to be able to fund. And it's probably not as easy as a financial equation when it comes to the non-revenue sports, like you say, because baseball's increased quite a bit, and a lot of the other sports have as well. But the intent is going to be to fill all of those scholarships. Because if you're going to be one of the best athletic programs in the country, that's something that you have to do to remain competitive. And so that's a lot more money that's kind of coming in, and that's required. And so, again, that's one of the important parts of this, is now that Carolina has a streamlined approach in place, and they're going to be able to do for-profit, nonprofit options. There's going to be a lot of things happening on the commercial side that'll generate revenue. A lot of those people will see them in the years to come and say, "Wait a minute, is that seems like that's going to be benefiting NIL? That's going to be benefiting OWL management." Well, it probably will be, and so it's going to be one of those things that is going to kind of build out, and it'll be very good. It's necessary because, as you say, I mean, a house settlement deal, okay, that's a lot of money that schools are going to have to pay out. Now you got increased scholarships. It's a lot of money. You've got the media rights stuff that's always on the forefront. So things are only getting more expensive, and so to have a platform in place where you can maximize contributions, you can maximize commercial opportunities, that's going to be helpful for North Carolina in meeting those demands.
Yeah, I talked with head baseball coach Scott Forbes a lot, and he says his goal with all this is to make sure his players can come through North Carolina and hopefully get onto the professional levels, but either way, leave North Carolina debt free, um, given what they've given to the university in time, blood, sweat, tears, and all. And that applies across the board for all, especially non revenue sports. It is North Carolina, to your point, prides itself on being competitive across the board. And to do that, they need to be competitive in the marketplace. I think Carolina NIL is the way that we will see that happen. Greg, anything left? We've got a ton to talk about on these next levels. Like I said, during the summer, we talked to coaches and some players. Joey and Greg had Mac Brown talking about this, and of course, we talked football specific stuff. But Greg, so much to talk about on this. You mentioned a lot of money. We got a lot of money discussions coming up over the next few months with North Carolina athletics. This is only a small part of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the new world we're in. We've talked for years about once student athletes get to a point where they're able to earn some of the money and receive some of the money that they help generate, it's going to change the dynamics of college athletics. We're there. And what that means is either you're going to scale back in a lot of these other areas so that you can fund student athletes properly, or you expand and try to increase revenue flows. And I think for most Power Five programs, they're taking that route first. Let's see what we can do to generate revenue so that we can keep status quo. And then if we have to make changes down the road, then so be it. But that's where we are right now.
Carolina NIL launches today, August 1st, 2024. CarolinaNIL.com. Find out everything you need. Adam Smith's got a great article up on Inside Carolina. Greg will be doing plenty of written work over the next several weeks. And of course, the Inside Carolina message boards are always full of the everyday folks commenting on this stuff. It's an interesting dynamic, an interesting world we were in. North Carolina takes a big step to get it all together with Carolina NIL. Greg, as always, appreciate you being a trooper through these. There is no off-season. Carolina football practice has started. We'll be back with more crazy money talk as we get along. Thanks, Greg.
Yep. Thanks, Tommy.